twisted her head towards the bedside unit. The rest of her body stayed glued to the mattress. She rubbed her eyes and tried to read the numbers on the e-alarm. It was 6:50-something in the morning, an unfamiliar time for her, especially on a day off. Indy Day meowed from behind the bedroom door. Britt buried her face in the pillow and hauled the duvet over her head. There was no Howie underneath it. She remembered now the early morning bleep, the scramble for clean underwear, the frantic search for his stupid bloody beeper. It must have been urgent. The duvet was providing no protection from the cat's cries for attention, which was starting to sound more threatening, but she'd only had 3 hours' sleep and her energy levels were too low for cat feeding. She stared up at the ceiling and replayed in her head one more time yesterday's conversation with George, her editor at the Republican newspaper. She could remember it word for word. "Sit down, Britt, this won't take long." "I'll stand if you don't mind. I prefer to stand when I receive bad news." "Why do you assume it's going to be bad news?" "Because you always give me bad news in your office on Monday afternoons, and this is your office, and it's Monday afternoon. You often call the bad news good news, but I'm a journalist, I know the difference." She flashed a half-second smile. George delivered the bad news. 2 of the features team were involved in a nasty car crash on Fulham High Street yesterday. Thankfully they'll survive, but they're going to be on long-term sick leave. He peered over the top of his glasses. "It means we're seriously short-staffed in that section." Britt didn't like the sound of this. "So I've made a decision," announced George. She stood motionless, like a condemned criminal waiting for the hangman's trap door to open beneath her feet. "I'm taking you off the news desk, Britt, and putting you on features." She gave an enormous sigh. Features were her worst nightmare. "Lifestyle features," added George. Scrap that last thought. Lifestyle features were her worst nightmare. "You mean all that crap that sells advertising and no one reads?" "Our sub-editors read it, and that's good enough for me. You start next Monday, take the rest of the week off. Call it a reward for all your hard work on news." Britt walked to George's desk and leaned forward. "I'd rather you fired me than have to write that crap." George jolted back in his seat. With his grey suit and whiskers, he reminded her of a trapped mouse. Howie often complimented Britt on her cat's eyes, and she fixed them on George in the same way she'd seen Indy Day focus on small rodents. "You're a very good journalist," croaked George. "I have no intention of firing you." Britt leaned back from the desk. "Then keep me on news, where I belong." "Look, Britt, lifestyle features aren't so bad. They remind people of the lives they're not living. This isn't America, George. Anyone with a lifestyle packed their bags for the new states 15 years ago." "Not everyone," George breathed in noisily through his nose. "I stayed." Britt checked herself mid-outrage. Emigration was still a raw subject for many of the Republic's citizens. Millions of Britain's brightest had left for the rebranded United States just a few months after Britain's 2029 revolution. Millions more had had their applications rejected. Any insinuation that George hadn't met the Americans' criteria could get her fired. And despite her earlier bullishness, she didn't really want to lose her job. That meant there was only one option. She'd have to strain every fibre in her body and be diplomatic. She took a deep breath. "You thought you could make a difference by staying here, just like I want to make a difference. But I can't make a difference on features. I just can't. I can only make a difference on news." She wasn't sure where all that make-a-difference rubbish had come from, but it sounded sincere. She attempted a warm smile, but failed. Forget facial expressions. Maybe he would see her point of view, see her well-reasoned argument in all its logical glory. It was clear to her she was in the right. He was just being a dick. George got up, keeping his eyes fixed on Britt. They stared at each other, arms by their sides, like 2 gunslingers in one of those old-world westerns that Howie liked to watch. She felt the muscles in the back of her neck tense as he opened his mouth. "No, I'm sorry. You've been on news for some time now, and this will..."